Back over the years, we have seen countless multiplayer games, with some being good and some being bad. But when thinking about multiplayer games, it's hard to forget Pixel Gun 3D, which when released back in 2013 was massively popular as its multiplayer modes were heavily loved from players around the world. But now with its ever decline into the depth of dead video games, looking back, I realised something. Its campaign mode was oddly terrifying. But why? With its multiplayer mode taking the world by storm, a lot of people overlooked the campaign, including myself for a while, but I decided to revisit it after all these years. You are introduced to this guy, referred to as Newbie, who is woken up by noises made from zombies. Now, as you do, you get up with a gun that you magically have for some reason and go investigate. But nevertheless, after this introduction, you are shot straight into the action. Now, the main aim of the campaign levels is to kill waves of enemies and then fight a boss. Simple, really. But when diving into each level more closely, there's just something that doesn't feel right. When advancing through each map, it was pretty plain to see the dark atmosphere that was created. For example, my two most dreaded levels, Slender Forest and the Hospital. When you first get thrust into the forest, it's pretty easy to just want to camp by the police car. The dull-lit areas and heavily congested forests made for enemies to seemingly creep up on you without you noticing. This boss, this guy, Slender Man, could magically teleport himself in a matter of seconds, making it almost impossible to know where and when he was coming for you. To make matters worse, you had to deal with all the other annoying monsters chasing you as well. And with the little space on this map, it was easy to get crowded by a horde and ultimately die. This isn't necessary, but I wanted to add it anyway. When you see your pet die to an enemy also added another sense of horror, as I cry out to see that my pet stone has been met with its demise. This is ultimately the same with the hospital as well. The poorly lit vibe, mixed with the many hallways with monsters coming from each side, created a sheer sense of terror every time I tried to play it. This sense of isolation as you are plunged to confront enemies with no backup created an everlasting tension with Pixel Gun 3D's campaign levels. But even though there were many enemies around, and your pet if you happen to have one, the game's atmosphere ultimately made you feel alone. No one was around. You were the only one for miles and miles on end. And when you make your way through the school, knowing that the kids there were tortured provided that extra little kick in the butt that the developers were going for. Oh, and did I mention laughter? Yeah, you can hear kids laughing in the upside-down classroom as well. Knowing what has gone down, with the virus outbreaks and experiments gone wrong, added to the overwhelming level of unease players felt. Now, most of this wouldn't have been nearly as terrifying if the soundtrack wasn't as menacing and scary as this. However, some levels were near silent, so basically you could hear your own thoughts. With the ambient noises such as distant growls, echoes, and trees moving, and sudden music spikes set a creepy tone when moving through the levels, making you feel like you're being watched from a distance, which then you realize you were when you see Slender Man staring at you from a distance, then teleporting away. Pixel Gun 3D's campaign featured 9 bosses, each appearing at the end of the levels. Some were not that scary though, with level 1 and 2 featuring these idiots, a ghost and a 2-headed zombie police dude, which ultimately you could kill from a distance at ease. But as you progress further, the bosses become even more difficult and even more terrifying. For example, I've already touched on it, but Slender Man could teleport literally anywhere in a matter of seconds. You could be walking through the forest minding your own business, and then the screen goes static and he shows up behind a tree, scaring you to death. The chainsaw doctor of the hospital was pretty simple to kill. However, when you didn't have a clear sight of him, all you could hear was the rumbling of the chainsaw, which would also get louder when he would get closer. This would always cause me to panic and back myself into a corner, because even though you could hear it, you would still have no idea where he was coming from. But with all these on-the-nose additions to this game, it was the lesser seen visuals that also created a heightened sense of fear. Many of the levels had destroyed buildings and cars seemingly all over the place, like on the bridge. And also remnants of resistance efforts like that poor man at the cemetery who unfortunately succumbed to the zombies. Each level told a story of resistance and collapse, with the civilian efforts ultimately coming undone, allowing players like myself to piece together the grim narrative. Pixel Gun 3d's campaign is oddly terrifying because it masterfully blends scary environments, creepy enemies, and suspenseful sound design, much different from its multiplayer counterpart, which features a vibrant and colourful world. But even with the massive decline of Pixel Gun 3D in the past years, the campaign still stands out as a terrifying addition to the game.